Asus sent me their Z270 TUF Mark 1 motherboard. This is a relatively high-end board we're obviously going to take a look at in the video, and the main feature of this is obviously the thermal armor. This is, as you can see, sort of plastic covering that covers the Realtek audio, as well as the optional PCI covers. These covers allow you to basically cover up the PCI slots that you aren't using. They just clip in, they're fairly simple to use, and do match the aesthetic quite nicely. Down the bottom you have an upright M.2 port, along with a full set of I/O, Thunderbolt 3, USB 3, USB 2 along the bottom, and another hidden M.2 port, which, by the way, this doesn't have any heat shielding or anything. This is literally just a plastic cover that somewhat restricts airflow, so do be careful with that. You also have some debug LEDs to the right of the chipset heatsink, as well as 6 SATA ports and a total of 10 PWM fan headers, 6 down at the side and then 4 up at the top. It's also powered by a single 8-pin, which is nice for power supply compatibility, and obviously you have the socket 1151 in the middle with the 4 DDR4 RAM DIMMs. You have a quite nice pattern on the PCB around the socket area, and of course you do have reinforced PCI slots on the X16 at the top and the X8 in the sort of middle of the board. Sticking with reinforcing, the back of the board has a large metal plate on it. I believe this is meant to just be to effectively hold the front panel sort of plastic on, but it does look quite cool too. The rear I/O is also quite nice, 4 USB 2 ports as well as another USB 2 port for diagnosis, a BIOS clear switch as well as dual gigabit Ethernet, both Intel LANs, USB 3, USB 3.1 Type-C and Type-A, and a nice audio setup. The board itself doesn't have too many flashy RGB LEDs, just a single component in the middle, which, as you can see, is quite stylish, and you can change that in software, as well as also turn it completely off in the BIOS if you prefer. And you'd also have a couple of 3D printed areas that you can change up if you like. Moving on to the BIOS, you can see that it's also pretty decent. You obviously have the AI tweaker options for some overclocking. You also have plenty of advanced options, including the ability to completely turn off the RGB LEDs, also, configure Thunderbolts, can change the storage configurations, everything you'd expect to do in a BIOS you can do. You can also use the Q fan control software to be able to monitor and change the speed of your fans and change the fan curves and that sort of thing. You also have an easy tuning wizard which allows you to auto overclock your CPU depending on what cooling you use. For me, there really isn't too much to complain about. It's a very nice motherboard. Of course, aesthetically that's going to be up to you what you prefer here. Of course, the thermal armor is, for me, quite a nice design. It's obviously lacking in the RGB element as such, so if that's what you want, well, you do have the small section on the motherboard. I don't see an RGB header on here. You can't connect any LED strips to it, so if that's what you're interested in, then you might want to take a look at some of the Strix or the just other ROG boards. In terms of the BIOS, as I mentioned earlier, it's still perfectly capable of overclocking. I think potentially you might be a better shot with some of the ROG boards again, just for that really best overclocking experience as such, but it's certainly not lacking in any way. It's still perfectly functional, even if it is a little more standard look as opposed to the ROG look. In terms of feature sets, there's also nothing to complain about here. It's a nice rich feature set. There's 2 M.2 ports on here, obviously a nice collection of SATA, a whole lot of fan headers. There's 10 in total here, and I think they're all 4-pin, which is kind of incredible, and obviously you can use the software to be able to control those fans. But the other thing to mention is that the 2 gigabit NICs on the back, from what I can see, they are teamable, so if you want to run them effectively together in 2 gigabit per second mode, then you can do that. Of course, you will need a device as such that can actually run 2 gigabits. So, for example, some of the QNAP NASs I've looked at do have port teaming available, so that might be an option, especially if you have a switch and router that can handle that sort of thing. They're both Intel NICs, which is quite nice, but yeah, other than that, overall it is quite a nice aesthetic. It's a nice board, and besides the price, which is fairly high, especially compared to some of the other boards that you can get for this price point, it's that would be something to take a note of. But if this is the aesthetic you want, and you want a nice, fairly high-end motherboard with decent overclocking potential, obviously nice I/O and all that sort of stuff, then I can't really not recommend this one. So yeah, in terms of scoring, I'm going to go with, I think, a 4 for value for money. In terms of performance, I'm going to go with a 5. In terms of functionality, I'm going to go with, I think, a 4.5. Style for me is going to be a 4.5, and TechteamGB score of, I think, a 4.5 as well, with a gold award. It's a great motherboard. I do recommend it. It is, as I said, fairly expensive, especially because from what I understand, at least at the time of filming, for example, Gigabyte's Gaming 7 board is actually cheaper than this one, and that one obviously still does have 2 gigabit NICs, although those ones aren't, one of them's killer and one of them's Intel, but it does have that feature. Obviously it has a lot more RGB elements, and if you want to connect any LED strips to that one you can, whereas this one you can't, but aesthetically they are fairly different. So I guess that's kind of that really. Hope you enjoyed the video and found it useful and informative. If you did, feel free to subscribe, like, and check out some of the other motherboard reviews, especially on the Z270 category. I'll leave an annotation over here for you, you can check that out. And of course I'll leave the subscribe button there too. Otherwise, if you want to pick up this board, please do use the Amazon affiliate link or the Overclockers UK affiliate links in the description down below. It does genuinely help me out, supports the channel, keeps these videos going and all that sort of stuff, so please do use those. And obviously the more general links as well. And yeah, other than that, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you all in the next one.